wanted to start by talking about a couple of coins, which I'll name because this is all public, that are complete and abject failures. So what I wanted to start with is a coin called DAX coins. So DAX coins, I think, did its ICO last July. The owners or the promoters of DAX coins essentially pre-mined and took 500 million DAX coins for themselves. They had no roadmap for what the purpose of DAX coins was. They promised returns of 2% per day to the people who went into the initial coin offering. And they quoted DAX coins only in Bitcoin. In July, DAX coins was worth 0.00003 Bitcoins. So 4 zeros and a 3. A second coin that I'll highlight as a failure is a coin called Plex coins. And I said I'm Canadian. I'm embarrassed to say Plex coins was promoted by Canadians. They raised $15 million in their ICO. The major promoter of this was someone who already had repeated SEC violations. They siphoned off at least $1 million of it into their personal accounts quite quickly. The value of Plex coins was $3.75 back in June, and now it's 3 cents. And I'm not sure you could sell it at 3 cents. And I just tell you this to say that out of the 1,000 coins and the new coins that are coming up, I think it's fair to say that a very high percentage of them will ultimately not have value. On the other hand, I wanted to talk about a positive coin that may or may not have value, but I think is the way that the construction of these coins needs to be thought about it. So why would you need a coin or a new currency? Because if you create an economic ecosystem, there can be value to the coin for the actors in the economic ecosystem. And when you're working within the ecosystem, you can exchange the coins for services between parties there. You don't have to go through exchange rates if you're working in an international world. So there is a very strong argument that it does make sense to create these private currencies. And the ones that are approaching it the best, in our view or my view, are the ones that are creating an ecosystem and then designing the coins with some principles of economics to make sure that the coin holds its value. And in fact, a lot of the thinking is they don't want the value to speculate too much, to go up too fast, because that actually upsets the economics. So let me give you a positive coin of one of these. It's a company called Sweetbridge in the United States. Sweetbridge has been set up by a just fantastic team, very well capitalized. And their purpose is to remake the trading financial system. So right now when we do global trading, supply chain, it's extremely inefficient. It uses too much capital. Capital is tied up for too long. And they're trying to remake that system. And there's a native currency within the system that basically allows cross-border collateralization of assets. And because of the way they've approached setting this up, they've issued their initial coin. It has increased in value, not excessively on that, but they are managing very tightly how the economics of the Sweetbridge network evolves so the coin has a general utility value. And I just give these stories so that if you are an investor in the coins that are for ecosystems, I think the number one thing is that you really have to do a huge amount of research into what is the underlying economic ecosystem. Does it need a coin? How is the coin structured to give the right incentives? And one of the most important aspects of these coins, of course, is the game theory aspect. The value of a coin depends on what other actors in the system are doing and how they perceive the value of the coin. And so the best designed coins are ones that think through all of these game theoretic considerations. So those are some of the smaller coins, but I think that probably what people want to hear about is a cryptonomic view of some of the bigger coins. I think the jury is really out whether something like Litecoin or Dash can be the dominant transactional currency. Because if you think about the payment system for a moment, one of the things that you realize is the payment system doesn't have a dominant mechanism. Payments are, you have all sorts of different kinds of payment needs. Sometimes you go out at night and you want to buy suya, cash is the easiest way. If we had more developed mobile money, maybe that's the easiest way. People have the Visa payment system. If you're doing international transfer, you have SWIFT, you have Western Union. So we already have an ecosystem where different payment systems coexist for different types of uses. It's not clear that the advantages of a pure payment cryptocurrency that doesn't give any return, so a coin in an ecosystem might give a return to you, to an investor or to a user, but something like Litecoin or Dash has no return. It's not clear why all of a sudden Dash or Litecoin would dominate. They would have their use cases, but they would coexist with many other use cases. Now, what are the economic implications of that? For your transactional currency, you only get transactional currency when you need to do transactions. It's not usually a reserve of a store of value. So it's just the same any commodity. I mean, normally you don't go out and buy 500 boxes of cornflakes as a store of value. You buy one box of cornflakes, and when you get a little low, you buy another box of cornflakes. So even if Lite and Dash were used extensively and had their part of the ecosystem, you would only buy your Lite or Dash when you needed it for those types of purchases. And that has implications for the eventual value of Lite and Dash. And if you look on the internet, you can see some of those calculations. So I think it's very unclear whether or not these will be the non-return type coins will really soar in value. And of course, speculators have driven up their value. And what's driving that, of course, is the ratio between speculators and users of these types of things. And unfortunately, because we're such a brave new world at the moment, the ratio of speculators to true users is way out of whack on that. And of course, the speculator buys because he thinks the value is going to be higher in the future. A user buys because he has a use for it. So let me talk then about the biggest coin of all, Bitcoin, because I think it's very interesting. Bitcoin is not useful for transactions, or for very few transactions. Why is that? Because the new blocks in the blockchain are only created every 10 minutes. So if I spend most of the Naira I have here on Heineken beer. So if I go to the bar at night and I have my Heineken, I want to pay the bill, I'm going to have to wait, if I try to pay with Bitcoin, 5 or 6 minutes on average, or up to 10 minutes to confirm that transaction. So it can never be a day-to-day transactional currency. Perhaps if you were buying a house or a car, it could be used, but only in a small number of cases. But I think that what's the most interesting about Bitcoin is its potential as a reserve currency. So you might say, well, Bitcoin is created literally out of ether. Why would it be a reserve currency? But that's no different than a Japanese yen, or the US dollar, or the euro, or other reserve currencies. And of course, we have one other commodity countries use in reserve, which is gold. And gold and Bitcoin share a lot of characteristics. Obviously, one characteristic they don't share is gold has a use in electronics, as jewelry, but that's about 20% of the gold that exists in the world. Most of the gold is held as a reserve, and of course it's not useful for transactions. It's actually not easily divisible in any physical sense. So in that way, actually, Bitcoin has more characteristics of it. So I think the most interesting thing about the future for Bitcoin is, does it become a reserve currency? Do countries say, well, I want to hold less US dollars, I want to hold less yen, I want to hold more Bitcoin. This country, of course, we've seen the reserves increase from a low of $23 billion to $40 billion. Most reserves here are held as US dollars. But there's very good arguments as we become closer to Asia and China that we should diversify our holdings of that. So what are the economics of Bitcoin if it becomes a reserve currency? So to put this in perspective, just some rough calculations I was reading from a very distinguished thinker. If Bitcoin had the same, replaced the gold reserves, it would have a total value of $2 trillion. But of course, you wouldn't replace just gold. People would swap out their yen or their dollars or their euros for some Bitcoin as well. So under some very reasonable assumptions, there's a non-zero probability that sometime in the future, if Bitcoin becomes a reserve currency, by these calculations, that the world would hold between $5 and $15 trillion worth of Bitcoin. And that's, I think, based on around 10% of your reserves. Now that becomes very interesting because if Bitcoin is worth $5 to $15 trillion in the future, there's only a fixed number of Bitcoins, so the calculation of the price, just these calculations, if I'm quoted in the press, these are just calculations, they're not predictions. But the price would be between $250,000 to $750,000 per Bitcoin. So whether or not you think Bitcoin is a good buy at 10,000 will depend on your probabilistic assessment of whether you think that Bitcoin will become a reserve currency on that. But you don't need a very big probability of that happening for Bitcoin still to be undervalued.
One very key thing you said was that the potential of cryptocurrency hangs on it becoming a reserve currency in the future. Can you expatiate further on this?
Well, I think that all countries hold reserve currencies, and they hold some gold. So they hold some gold, some US dollars, some euros, some yen, for example. Bitcoin is not really well suited to becoming a transactional currency because it's quite slow every 10 minutes. But it has the potential to be a reserve currency. So its future value really depends on whether it becomes a reserve currency, in which case it'll be very valuable, or if it doesn't become a reserve currency, then it'll probably have very little value.
Now, in terms of looking at the future and an understanding that it has to be taken seriously by governments, we've seen signals from South Korea about being banned. We've even seen UK cracking down on it and EU. What do you see in terms of adoption and acceptance from leaders across the globe in the future?
Well, I think that the regulators across the world are struggling with what's going on, and partially they've been pushed to this situation because so many people have started to speculate, and a lot of these coins were launched not for speculators, or for a use within an ecosystem. I think in Nigeria, the CBN has really made an effort to understand how cryptocurrencies work. They haven't really come to a conclusion on that, but I think we'll continue to see regulators see the value in it, but be cautious about not letting people start to lose vast amounts of money in speculative activities.
So finally, what's the outlook for cryptocurrency and the economy of it? What do you want to say to Nigerians and Africans about it?
Well, I think if you look at a new ICO, initial coin offering, I think those are all very specific. I think a high number of them will never have any value, or they were deliberately set up as a fraud, and we need to steer clear of those. Some of them have been set up by very credible people to solve a problem. Those coins may have value, but as an investor in these new cryptocurrencies, that's what you need to understand. And of course, we already have 1,000 cryptocurrencies. Many of them are going to lose their value, so we need to be very discerning as investors of which ones actually have a future and a use case and have value. So, but of course, most people only hear about the top 2 or 3, which are the most established ones.